The threat came wrapped in silence, not shouted but pressed into the air like a loaded gun when Eleanor Brooks was told to sign the papers or die, and in that instant the room seemed to shrink around her as if the walls themselves were leaning in to watch what choice a broken woman would make when fear finally cornered her. Before the story pulls you any deeper, take a moment right now and like this video, comment, share it, and subscribe to the channel if you believe in kindness, second chances, and unseen strength, and tell us in the comments where you are watching from, because stories like this travel farther when hearts carry them together. Eleanor was a widow with tired eyes and hands that still smelled faintly of cleaning chemicals from years of scrubbing offices at night. A woman who had spent her life choosing silence because silence felt safer than resistance, and the man standing across from her that day knew exactly how to use that weakness. His name was Victor Hale, a developer with polished shoes and a smile that never touched his eyes, and he wanted her house, the last thing her late husband had left behind. A narrow brick home pressed between larger properties that he planned to tear down for a luxury project. Eleanor had refused his offers politely at first, then firmly, because that house held memories stitched into the walls, birthdays marked by pencil lines in the hallway, and a son who used to sit on the front steps watching the world go by before life pulled him in a direction she never fully understood. Victor did not understand sentiment, only leverage, and now leverage stood between them in the form of threats disguised as legal warnings, veiled suggestions of accidents that happened to stubborn people, and papers slid across a desk that felt colder than steel. Eleanor felt her heart pounding as she thought of her son Daniel, estranged for years, a boy who had left town angry and restless and grown into a man she only knew through rumors, and the occasional message that arrived without a return address. She did not tell Victor that her son existed, because to her he felt like a wound that never healed, and to Victor she wanted to appear alone, small, and easy to crush. Days turned heavy as Victor's pressure increased. Notices taped to her door, strangers lingering near her house at night, the sound of a car idling too long outside making her flinch behind the curtains. And still she refused to sign, clinging to the belief that if she held on long enough, something would change even if she could not imagine what that something was. Eleanor struggled in quiet ways, skipping meals to save money, sleeping in short bursts with the lights on, whispering prayers she was not sure anyone heard, and wondering if dignity was worth dying for when fear sat on her chest like a weight. The breaking point came when she returned home one evening to find the lock scratched and the door ajar, nothing stolen, but everything disturbed, a message without words that told her how close danger really was, and she sank to the kitchen floor with tears she had held back for years finally spilling free. That night, with shaking hands, she wrote a letter she never planned to send, addressed to Daniel, not asking for help but simply telling him she was proud of him no matter what people said, sealing it as if sealing a goodbye, and leaving it on the table before going to bed unsure if she would wake up. What Eleanor did not know was that Daniel Brooks was no longer just a restless boy but a full-patch member of the Hells Angels, a man who lived by a code few outsiders understood, one that valued loyalty above all else, and that somewhere far from her quiet street, he felt a pull he could not explain, a heaviness in his chest that made him leave a meeting early and ride through the night with his thoughts, spiraling back to a woman he had hurt by leaving. The next morning, Victor returned with the same smile and sharper eyes, bringing the papers again, reminding Eleanor calmly of consequences, leaning in close enough that she could smell his expensive cologne mixed with something rotten beneath, and she realized that fear had finally cornered her, that she might not survive another refusal. Her hands trembled as she reached for the pen, and in that moment a low rumble cut through the air outside, not one engine, but many, a sound that vibrated through the floor and into her bones, growing louder until it drowned out Victor's voice and froze him mid-sentence. The street filled with motorcycles, chrome and leather, and quiet intensity. Dozens of men and women dismounting in unison, their presence alone shifting the balance of the world. And when Daniel stepped forward, his face hardened by years on the road, but eyes unmistakably familiar, Eleanor's breath caught as past and present collided. Victor did not know who Daniel was, did not recognize the insignia on the jackets or understand the silence that followed when Daniel looked at him, and he laughed nervously, trying to assert control with words that fell flat against the wall of resolve. Daniel did not raise his voice or his hands because he did not need to, and instead he listened as Victor repeated his demand, watching carefully as the man grew more uncomfortable with every second of steady eye contact. The shift was subtle but powerful, as if the air itself had chosen a side, and Victor began to realize that his threats meant nothing here, that the leverage he relied on had evaporated in the presence of people who were not afraid of him or what he represented. Eleanor watched from the doorway, her fear slowly untangling into disbelief as Daniel placed himself between her and Victor without touching either of them, a living barrier built on loyalty and unspoken promises, and for the first time in years she felt protected. Papers were no longer pushed across the desk, but pulled back into Victor's briefcase with clumsy hands, his voice faltering as he muttered about misunderstandings and future discussions that would never happen, and when he finally retreated, his polished shoes moving faster than before, the street seemed to exhale. Daniel turned to Eleanor then, and though no words were spoken, everything that needed to be said passed between them, regret and forgiveness, and love all tangled together, in a look that made her cry openly without shame. The days that followed brought a different kind of challenge, as Eleanor faced the reality of her son's life and the judgments that came with it, learning that protection sometimes arrived in unexpected forms and that goodness did not always wear a gentle face. Daniel stayed, repairing the lock, fixing the fence, sitting quietly at the kitchen table as if trying to make up for lost years through presence alone, and Eleanor began to heal in small, steady ways, her fear replaced by a cautious hope that grew stronger each morning she woke without dread. Word spread that Victor had backed off, that the project had moved elsewhere, and Eleanor's house stood untouched, not because of legal battles or money, but because of a line drawn by loyalty and love. As this story reaches its quiet truth, take a moment if it touched your heart to like, share, and comment, because engagement helps stories of courage reach others who might need them more than we know. Eleanor eventually framed the unsigned papers and hung them in the hallway, a reminder that standing your ground could change your life when you least expected it. And Daniel rode on after some time, not disappearing this time but staying connected, calling often, returning when he could, no longer a ghost but a son. Just before this story ends, tell us in the comments what this moment meant to you and whether you believe people can come back stronger after years of distance. In the end, Eleanor learned that love could roar as loudly as engines and still feel like home, and Daniel learned that the fiercest loyalty he would ever know began and ended with the woman who refused to sign away her soul, proving that even in the shadow of fear, courage sometimes arrives wearing leather and forgiveness walks right beside it. The engines faded into a low, steady hum as the riders shut them off one by one, and the sudden quiet felt heavier than the noise had been, pressing against Victor Hale's chest until his breath came shallow and quick. He stood stiffly on Eleanor's front walk, briefcase clutched like a shield, eyes darting from jacket to jacket, symbol to symbol, his mind scrambling for the kind of authority that had always saved him before and finding none that mattered here. Eleanor watched from just inside the doorway, her fingers gripping the frame, half expecting the moment to shatter like a dream if she blinked too hard. Daniel didn't move closer. He didn't need to. His presence alone changed the geometry of the space, turning Victor's confident posture into something smaller, something defensive. When Victor tried to speak again, his voice came out thin, rehearsed lines about zoning laws and contracts sounding absurd in the open air, stripped of their usual intimidation. Daniel listened, head tilted slightly, as if giving the man more respect than his words deserved, and that calm unsettled Victor more than shouting ever could have. "You're done here," Daniel said finally, his voice low and even carrying just far enough to be heard by everyone present. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact. Victor swallowed, glanced past Daniel at the silent wall of riders, and for the first time understood that leverage worked both ways. He nodded too quickly, muttered something about lawyers and miscommunication, and backed toward his car without turning his back until he reached the door. When he drove off, tires squealing faintly, Eleanor felt a tension she had lived with for months drained from her body, so suddenly her knees nearly buckled. Daniel turned then, and the years between them rushed forward all at once. Eleanor saw the boy he had been layered beneath the man he'd become, the same eyes that used to search for her in a crowd, now holding caution, regret, and something fragile she had not expected. Hope. She stepped forward without thinking, and when he opened his arms, the embrace felt like a homecoming delayed too long, but never truly lost. They stood that way as the riders quietly mounted up and rolled away, leaving mother and son alone on the sidewalk where fear had once ruled. Inside the house, the air felt different, lighter, as if the walls themselves had relaxed. Daniel walked through each room slowly, taking in the worn furniture, the small repairs that had been put off, the life his mother had carried alone. He fixed the lock that night, hand steady and practiced, then stayed at the kitchen table long after the tools were put away, listening as Eleanor spoke in hesitant pieces about the threats, the nights she couldn't sleep, the way she had almost given in. "I thought you were better off not knowing," she said quietly, staring into her cup of tea. "I didn't want you dragged into my trouble." Daniel shook his head. "You were never trouble," he replied. "I just didn't know how to come back." The days that followed were not magically easy. Neighbors watched from behind curtains, curiosity and judgment mixing freely, and Eleanor felt the weight of their looks even as she refused to bow under them anymore. Daniel stayed close, repairing the fence,